All right, I think we're on time and ready to go. Well, hello and welcome to this special segment of the Pros and Content Connect event. I'm Tim Minahan, the Executive Vice President of Business Strategy and the Chief Marketing Officer here at Citrix, which is the world's leader of digital workspace solutions. Now, I'll be your host and moderator for this timely discussion on how the global pandemic will forever change the face of work as we know it. And now, no discussion on the future of work is certainly complete without the advice and counsel of my special guest, Deloitte's Consultants Global HR Transformation Leader and a principal of Deloitte's Global Human Capital Practice, Art Mazer. Art, welcome.
Hey, Tim, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
No, excited to have you here. Art, as the one of the industry's premier advisors on work overall and workforce strategy, I bet you had thought you'd seen it all. That is until now.
Well, you're kind, but I think you're right. It is kind of everyone's been saying unprecedented times. That word unprecedented just seems underrated now. It's just hard to even fathom where we are in some respects, right?
Yeah, no doubt. That global pandemic has really changed the world's thinking about work in general. Where it gets done, how it gets done, who does it. We're entering in, for those that are keeping track, I believe it's month 4 of this global unplanned work from home experiment. And, it seems that, if there is any ounce of silver lining in all of this, is that it's kind of overturning some long-held misconceptions or even taboos about remote work, that idea that, work can't happen outside the office. And I know you're talking with executives, all the time, and HR executives and other business executives, and how they're thinking about their workforce strategies. So what are some of the key learnings that you're hearing from clients about their feelings and approaches to remote work and work overall in the face of this pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you frame it is spot on, and it's really fascinating to see the shift that has taken shape even in these short 4 months. Initially we've observed a lot of focus had to be there on what we think of as the respond moment, right? We were responding to individual needs, group needs, health and safety requirements, just very much reacting. And in that moment of responding, there was, I think, a lot of concern as to, will we have the right productivity and so forth. As we're seeing the world begin to take shape in this somewhat new normal, you're starting to see evidence of organizations moving from responding to thriving, and thriving in some interesting ways, right? Some of the executives that I'm fortunate to collaborate with, along with my colleagues, are noticing that there are certain types of work that, to your point, were always presumed to require working together in a facility, in many cases side by side, shoulder to shoulder. We have one major global client, for example, that observed that where they run a lot of operations centers with folks, sitting in those kind of close quarters that we've become familiar with. Maybe we never loved them, but they become the norm of corporate organizations. This one organization has said they're beginning to consider whether these roles in operations centers like that ever need to come back. And that it starts to unlock some interesting questions about geography for their workers. You set up a big center, everybody works in the center, you recruit to that center, and then you run out of talent in an area, so you start to build another center. And this client, along with a number of others that were involved in a recent roundtable conversation we had, were talking about the explorations they're having right now. And there's a lot of implications, around this idea of potentially unleashing yourself from physical workplaces, right? The technology implications, the collaboration requirements, and just down to the cultural implications.
Yeah, no doubt. And I want to come back to how the future of work is emerging as companies are beginning to rethink their workforce strategies, with geography no longer being a impediment to where they're sourcing and supporting talent. But I want to come back to the here and now just for a moment, because I'm sensing that it wasn't just executives and managers that are beginning to see the benefits, the positives of remote work, and were pleasantly surprised. There's also employees. We just did a study here at Citrix of more than 10,000 employees from companies around the world. We found that nearly 70% felt that they were more focused and more productive when working from home. In many cases, they also felt they were more creative and innovative when we're working remotely, rather than with all the stresses and distractions that come with working in an office. The thing that struck me the most was, over 80% said their remote working gave them a better kind of work-life balance. And now you're beginning to see this play out in the news, right? The Wall Street Journal had an article last week about this mass exodus from Silicon Valley as employees are realizing that, hey, you know what? I can do this work remote. I'm going to go live somewhere else where I can afford a better style of life, or have a better work-life balance. So, as there's a lot of executives and managers on the line today, and we're all wondering kind of what does this mean for talent sourcing and talent management and overall work models going forward?
Yeah, well, and I think we're seeing, fairly similar results in a variety of interactions with clients, along with some of our future of work analysis and surveys, even as recently as our new Human Capital Trends report, the 10th annual that just came out. And we're seeing the same kind of balance that's kind of starting to emerge. I think what's interesting is we have the increased productivity for those, reports like you've described, particularly in roles that lend themselves to working remotely, right? Guys like you and I, and folks within the types of work that are, laptop type workers, workers who are on the phone all the time or can operate in virtual capacities, I think are finding that, this is feasible, maybe more so than they expected. There's a balance as well that we're seeing, right? You read about, sort of the fatigue that's coming into play because of the use of video conversations like this, right? I read a study just the other day that was describing that the human brain processes a multitude of cues from a body language standpoint that go way beyond the sort of, chest up kind of space. And it's actually quite stressful. It's one thing for you and I to just one-to-one in this conversation. Workers are starting to indicate when they're in these roles and they're on these multiple kind of calls a day with lots of people involved, right? The sort of Brady that everybody's talking about, was posting, on social media. You're trying to process all of these different voices as well as these kind of cues visually, and you don't get to see all of the aspects that you normally do. Not everybody talks with their hands like I do. So it's hard to kind of stay with it and be comfortable in all cases. I think the other interesting challenge about this that balances the positives that we're seeing is that not every worker is in a position to work in these kinds of formats, right? So we've got manufacturing folks, we've got retail folks who are, on the front lines, right? Not to mention the healthcare workers and so forth who are having to be out and about and facing those questions of health and safety. And I think it's created, to your point, a new normal challenge for whether they be business leaders, HR leaders, operations leaders, to understand not only how we manage productivity in the day-to-day operations of a business, but also how do we care for safety and well-being of our workforce, both physically and as well as mentally, in new ways than maybe we had done before. So it's a really interesting balance, I think, that most organizations are working through.
Yeah, you're seeing this discussion crop up quite a bit right now, particularly as economies are beginning to open up. Companies are beginning to think, oh, I have to bring people back to the office. But as we're learning, and I'm sure you're advising, that back to the office, at least for the time being, is going to be anything but back to normal. And for the very first time, you're seeing companies hire on medical officers and really think about the safety and health first of their employees, their visitors, et cetera. So, looking at your crystal ball, I guess just in the next few months as economies open up and the like, what can we expect, or how should we be thinking about this as business leaders? How should we be thinking about rotating back to office, not only to create an actual physical safe environment, but also, to your point, the stresses that come along with, employees maybe being somewhat reluctant to actually get back to the office right now.
Yeah, I think this is where we're finding it's becoming increasingly critical to focus on the variety of sort of personas, or we might say worker archetypes, and recognize that there is no spreading of peanut butter in order to manage the right return to work kind of approach. I was alluding to this, I suppose, in some ways just a moment ago, but if you think about what it means for someone that works in a corporate kind of office environment versus someone that's out, say, in a distribution center or even in a research and development facility, someone who's a tech worker, each of the return to work strategies is probably a bit different. What we're finding is that if we take those employee or worker archetypes and overlay them across three future of work dimensions: the work itself, the workforce, meaning the kind of ways in which people bring their capabilities and their capacities to do work, and then the workplace itself, both physical and virtual, that the kind of evaluation of, does this work lend itself to virtual work over the long term? And if so, what are the implications or requirements? And what roles might require greater care for operating in a new world where we might see this pandemic followed by other viruses that will follow, and create this kind of different way of having to evaluate individual types of work, and then creating the possibilities of business contingency plans and approaches to manage the what you might think of as kind of waves that we've been hearing about, whether it's with this virus or something else. And I think what a lot of our clients are beginning to do is explore these different archetypes as a means to make sure that we're avoiding the trap that's such an easy trap on anything we do as humans, to kind of just go into a one-size-fits-all. I think this is helping to create maybe a more thoughtful set of approaches that allows different work, different workplaces, and different jobs to be managed in a different way as needed.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier, Art, the idea of you're seeing a lot of your clients moving from just the gee, how do we survive in this mode to how do we thrive? If you can think back this far, way back, before the global pandemic, about 6 months ago, the different conversations we were having as businesses were struggling with this massive shortage of medium to high skilled workers, right? And a lot of it, again, went back to that was exacerbated by their overarching work models, like you had indicated, where they would go to a city, they would set up a work hub, an office, a call center, whatever, and they would try to hire as much talent as they could around that. And by the way, their competitor would set up the an office right down the street, and they both be battling for talent. And, now we're seeing more flexible and remote work models, not just as a way to survive, but some savvy companies are saying, hey, we should really take advantage of this. We keep hearing on the news of different companies saying, hey, we're going to actually allow our employees to work remotely permanently. So one of the interesting things, I'm curious, we're also seeing some companies really look at it to kind of rethink their overall work models, to tap into new pools of talent that are maybe outside the conventional workforce, such as stay-at-home parents or retirees, or those caring for aging relatives who couldn't deal with a commute, who couldn't maybe work full time. How do you see this kind of emerging Homeforce, coming into play? And are we seeing acceleration, or do you expect an acceleration of it because of the environment we're all living in right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And I think there's also a big focus around the last, say, 5 years or so for organizations to be thinking about the experience of their workforce. And it's become, in some organizations that we work with, a bit of a a profession, right? There's a number of major organizations and emerging organizations that have appointed individuals to take accountability for that experience. And a long while back, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when this became a thing in the workforce side of things, we were seeing this as very focused on the employee experience. And, I would say probably within the last year, we started to see many more organizations take up a similar view as we've held, which is that you got to be thinking about this longer term and really caring for the experience of all of the workers, not just those that you might have as true employees, because of the emergence that was already happening of the gig worker, right? I think what we're seeing now is, to your point, Tim, that acceleration of so many of the aspects of the future of work, including the access to different and new talent. I think about some of the client conversations we've been having of late with the idea that many organizations are saying, we've been feeling restrained and restricted to the talent that we can acquire because of the locations of our offices or those sorts of things. And this idea that of attracting and retaining talent, I think is moving in the direction of more accessing talent the talent that an organization needs when it needs it, which becomes even more feasible in a world where we're not kind of sitting tied to office space and feeling like we have to recruit and relocate people in the location. I think the other thing that's happening for us, at least for those jobs that lend themselves and others that are increasingly beginning to lend themselves to leveraging technologies like live video conversations, is that there's a different level of connectivity, not just digital connectivity, but personal human connectivity that is emerging. And I think it's unleashing some things that, to your point at the top of our discussion, were taboos, right? I mean, how many times did people really feel comfortable interacting with a healthcare worker, in a physician or a nurse practitioner virtually? And it became a mandate, right, for quite some time here. So I think we've got these different mechanisms that are starting to emerge that are going to enable much more of a connection with people working, even if they're in wildly different places.
Yeah, I want to flesh that out just a little bit further. Art, when you talk about you open up this access to new pools of talent and the like, I'm hearing a lot from companies now is saying, hey, we want to take a much more agile look or adaptive look at our workplace. So that means balancing those pools of talent between full-time employees, regardless of where they work, in an office hub or remotely, and this kind of rising, you mentioned gig workers, contingent workforce that maybe we could turn on demand and turn off when the project's done. Are you seeing more and more companies looking differently at the concept of what a workforce really is?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, to your point, this was beginning to emerge in some degree earlier in the last, for the pandemic, maybe last 2 or 3 years. There's some studies that were suggesting that the workforce was indicating some 40% of workers desiring to work in non-traditional kinds of relationships with their employers. So, part-time, gig, kind of contractor relationships. And I think organizations that we've been working with have begun to respond to that, right? Human resource executives and their teams and business leaders saying, gosh, there's a bunch of talent out there interested in working with us. And it's not just in the Uber kinds of positions. We're talking data scientists, right? High-powered, experienced kind of thinking roles that are positioning themselves well for that kind of relationship. And I do think, a little bit of that crystal ball reading, we're going to see more of that.
That's great, Art. Well, to remain on time, because we have exactly 1 minute left. I just wanted to thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Art, for making time to share some of your advice. Before we go, I actually also wanted to encourage folks to continue the conversation. So I would encourage you all to spend some time on Deloitte's site and the great research that Art and his team are doing there, really on the future of work. Believe it or not, Art is active on Twitter as well, so I follow him. I would encourage you to do so as well. And if you want to discuss any of the research that we shared here, it's available at citrix.com/remote works. So, with that, Art, I want to thank you. Appreciate the time. It flew right by. Very important discussions, and I believe we're just at the beginning of the conversation. So I look forward to continuing it in the future.
Same here. Thanks so much, Tim. Thanks, everyone.
All right, be well.
Bye now.